All right, so today's question is, do your cues have enough edits or edit points, and how are those edit points working for an editor and ultimately in some kind of commercial environment? So when I am working on production music, trying to think very much like an editor, because ultimately if my music works well for an editor, they're going to use my music more, and that's what I want. The main thing that probably is going to help them the most is if my music has very obvious and very useful edit points. And I wanted to look at a few examples today and kind of start a discussion about whether, of course, you have edit points, whether you have enough of them, and are they easy to cut? Because not everything that's in time really supports an edit. And I can speak to this as well, having done a fair amount of video editing myself. So I'm going to be looking at this project that's behind me. And once again, as always, I work in Cubase, but I'll say this is not a Cubase specific tutorial. You could do this in whatever production environment you're using. The main idea here has much to do with compositional structure than really anything else. So let's just listen to a couple of examples of basically two different ways I think of my edit points, okay? One is a transition and the other is a stinger. So there is a common approach to transition around edit points with some kind of big whoosh or some kind of bang, some kind of impact. And that makes a lot of sense. What doesn't work very well for edit points, even though it might work musically, is just a steady beat, right? If you've got a steady beat, of course, you'd think, well, you can edit that. But the problem is if you just cut off a beat, it sounds jarring and strange, and an editor is never going to go for that. They want something that, first of all, they can cut that's clean, and second of all, that's going to contribute to the story. So if we just have like a regular drum beat, and I'll show you this in just a sec, and we just cut off in the middle of it, it doesn't sound that musical. Let's take a look. I'm going to take myself off the screen here, and so we can listen to this. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. And let me play this. Sorry, I think there we go. So there I had basically what I would kind of consider a stinger in the beginning. So there's this kind of boom sound, but it gives way to some very high-pitched, high-frequency audio, and it would work very well to edit into some kind of dark scene where something threatening has just happened, or the editor wants to convey that something new and threatening is on the scene. Maybe it's the beginning of a trailer, maybe it's the beginning of a cue or a scene, but it very much like there's a strong attack, and it's followed by these high-pitched kind of stinger sounds. Now, as we work forward, you'll see down here I've got a couple of these kind of riser things, and what I did here was I actually I did a little fade out. This is actually the same one shot, which I just reversed, but I did a fade out here because it was too jarring here, and I also kind of wanted to save the biggest edge of this riser for over here so that it again would have more impact. So you'll hear as this riser comes in, you get a kind of clapping sound at the very end. Now this gives way to an industrial beat, but it's a beat nonetheless. And if I were to just cut this off in the middle, then it wouldn't sound very musical. If I were to say, take this MIDI here and just cut it off like that. Now when we hear this, it's not as effective, let's say, as this kind of a riser where we actually had some audio. If you look down here, we've got this one shot rising along with this like triplet sort of machine gun thing here going into the beat. That gives this nice flow that tells a story, that starts to tell a story about something that's going to start. The riser gives it a lot of forward energy. The triplet kind of, those like hammer sounds, they create a sense of threat and urgency. And they're also sort of competing, because there's 3 of them there. Actually, I got 4 of them there. I'm basically sort of giving the editor a choice. They could go with my transition, which is the riser and the hammers straight into the beat, but they could also create an edit point right here. And then essentially they wind up being able to have some kind of scene. You've probably seen this kind of thing where, you know, maybe there's a build and then there's a, you know, dialogue line or some kind of one-liner, a punchy line, and then goes into the beat. So it's like I've given the editor the option of doing a mute or a cut on my piece that can help them tell the story. And telling the story is their main goal, and the music must support that, must make it easy for them to tell the story, and needs to tell the right kind of story. So obviously this music here is really well suited to some kind of darker, you know, maybe science fiction, sort of modern sound. Now, one of the common mistakes that I certainly make has to do with using effects. And I've actually got a reverb on here. You can hear there's like it's not actually a reverb, it's a delay. But you can hear that there's a delay. When this MIDI ends, you can see that I actually have some automation that bypasses an echo or delay module, and then it fires it off here, turns it on, and then you get the echo delay. And that creates a nice transition in terms of energy. It dissipates energy in a really graceful and musical, rhythmic way, which is nice. The problem with that, it's not always a mistake. In this piece, I'm going to keep it because I'm digging the way it works, and I'm happy with the other edit points that I have. But having that delay there can be a real problem, because if the editor wants to edit right here on this edit point, they can't use the audio after it, but they may want it. You know, that's another aspect to this, is they may want that delay. Again, they may be looking for, in the story they're telling, they may be trying to tell a story where that cut needs to dissipate energy in exactly the way that the delay is dissipating my rhythmic energy from that like industrial drum beat. Now, again, I have this build up down here. Comes into this little sort of rhythmic motif. And then into a different drum beat, but it's all basically the same tempo, all basically a very similar groove. So what I've achieved here is a handful of edit points that give the editor a set of options. There's a nice beginning. I've also got a very tight ending that they could use, this kind of what they call a button or stinger ending, and it is a very attention-getting but creates a feeling of unanswered or a question or unresolved, because of course, like in a movie trailer, for example, or maybe in a dramatic scene in the middle of the show, you want to move the energy forward into the next scene. And so having too much resolution in the music can actually be undesirable. You kind of want to have an unanswered question that then leads naturally into the next scene. So the beginning and the ending are have very useful edit points. But in the music as well, I'm creating some spaces where the editor could cut my music, move it over to after that one liner and bounce it right back in, and it'll all sync. It'll all have the right textural vibe. It'll all have the right rhythmic vibe. But I've made it easy for them to get that edit. I am giving them some options with a variety of transitions, just a cold, hard edit that they can just cut right off and it cuts to mute, or an edit where there is that echo trail, that delay that dissipates energy. Sometimes reverb tail can do that as well, but you must be careful because using a reverb tail or an echo can become a problem for the editor as well. And you basically want to always make sure that whatever you're doing serves a story. You have to kind of imagine how that would work. So do you have enough edits? Do you have a variety of edits in your piece is important. Are they easy to cut? Is a really important thing. What I've found as far as these transitions and edits that I want to also talk about briefly is the importance of using lots of different sources. So I use Backbone, which is a Steinberg drum and percussion engine. It creates really great sounds. There's a ton of awesome stuff in its library. But of course, I also use Action Strikes from Native Instruments. I also use Heaviosity's Damage, which you heard here, both for rhythmic patterns, for their loops, and for one-shots. I use just the standard sample libraries and one-shot libraries that I've accumulated over the years. And I find that if I mix these together, it's often a lot better than if I just use Action Strikes, or I just use Damage, or I'm just using Backbone. Because you can get kind of to the point where you're sounding like everyone else. And you want to avoid that. You want to create something that's original. And I'll even go as far as to take Action Strikes and blend it with hits from Backbone to layer them. I may take rhythmic elements from percussion or drums in, say, an engine like Groove Agent, and I'll layer that. Or you could do this with Abbey Road drums, or you could do it with Easy Drummer, but layer that with my Damage loops, so that there's just an original quality to it. That's really important to even in a 1.5 minute or 2 minute piece, to make sure that the textures are original. Try to be as original as you can with your ideas, but realize that having edit points, that's sort of an industry standard. It's a requirement of the music. So you don't really want to be too original around not having edit points. That's just not going to be useful. But you do want to be original when it comes to your textures, your sounds, even your rhythms, that sort of thing. Try to be as original as you possibly can. And one of the reasons I got a little confused there about whether or not my hammer hits were 3 or 4 is that I actually following a 3/4 metronome when I was composing this, but I'm also using some 4/4 loops and some 4/4 phrases. And that sort of juxtaposition of editing in 3/4, but having some loops that are in 4/4, creates a lot of interesting rhythms. It's one of my sort of go-to tricks for keeping my rhythms original. And so those are all, I think, the things I wanted to cover today about transitions and stingers and using them to reinforce edit points. I would love questions about anything related to this. You can leave them in the comments. Questions either about this topic or questions you'd like me to cover in future streams. Please like and subscribe. It really helps me surface these on YouTube, and I look forward to seeing you again in a couple of days. I'll see you then.